So with that, I'd like to introduce Jeremy and hand everything over to him. It's all yours, Jeremy.
Thank you so much, and nice to see so many of you, and nice to talk to so many fellow kinesiologists, which is quite unusual for me. I hope some of you had time to read the introduction that came out with your preliminary reflections, because that means I don't need to talk very much about me this morning. I'd much rather talk about information I want to share with you that I think will be helpful to you. But I realize that some people watching this, perhaps when it's recorded, won't have seen those introductory notes and things. So briefly, in my 35 years or so of kinesiology, there's been one process that's particularly appealed to me in terms of the benefits it gives to my clients. And that's what in 3-in-1 concepts is called a goal balance. And I'm sure many of you have your own ways of doing goal balances. What it does, as you know, is to put the client in touch with the picture of how they'd really like their future to be, and find and get rid of all the subconscious sabotage, they call it, that's holding them back. Now, it took me an embarrassingly long time to realize that there was one thing missing, which was to help them get from the comfort zone they've been in to the comfort zone they'd like to be in the future. That was missing from the goal balancing techniques that I was taught. And what was embarrassing about how long it took me to realize that was that for the same period of time, 35 years, I'd been running psychology workshops, which taught people exactly that. It taught people about how the mind works, the interactions between the conscious and the subconscious, and indeed how to make change in a comfortable way. So integrating some of my concepts from what I call my ABC of Success workshops in with my kinesiology enabled me to create what I called mindset priming. And one of the things that gives clients is more commitment to what it is they'd like their future to look like, whether that's being happier, more successful, whatever it might be for them. There's an analogy I draw sometimes to help people understand what I do and what I think lots of us do, which is to compare us to a motor car. If we go on a journey in a motor car, we decide where we want to go, we get in the car, turn on the ignition, and that gets the engine going. We then set the sat-nav, release the handbrake, and the car takes us majestically by the most appropriate and efficient route to where we want to be. We're not nearly that good. First of all, my experience is that I have yet to meet a client who is aiming for their ideal destination. Every client I've had, whether they're an Olympic competitor or whatever, so far, their conscious aspiration is not as far as their subconscious belief in how they would like their life to be. So we back up our goals for fear of success or whatever reasons we may have. So the second reason we're not as effective as the motor car is, very few of us understand how to set our mental sat-nav. Boardroom after boardroom, when I run workshops with these ABC concepts, their reaction has been, why did no one teach me this at school? Why did no one teach me this at business school? It's such fundamental understanding of how we work as people, how our minds work, and yet most of us not taught it. So most of us don't know how to set our mental sat-nav. Some people do almost instinctively, and they're the ones that perhaps are instinctively successful because they are being very effective in the way they think. And the third thing we're very bad at is knowing how to release our handbrake. I think most of us, to a greater or lesser degree, are going through life with our handbrake on, because it's very difficult for us to find, if you like, where that handbrake is and how to release it. And that's something that we as kinesiologists are good at helping people with. And with the mindset priming techniques, I think it might be even easier for you to do so than you're currently achieving. I've been lucky enough to work with and learn from some absolutely brilliant teachers and brilliant leaders. And so what I'm looking to share a little bit of today is what I've learned from them to pass on to you. Giving you just some key concepts from the ABC model and a few activities that will help you appreciate the concepts. I'm not going to talk non-stop. There's a couple of times when I'm going to give you a challenge, which will be a competition, and you can be able to put your answers into the chat box. I hope you all understand about the chat box or how to access the chat box. down at the bottom of your screens, you can access into the chat box, and you can put messages in there direct to Julie when you have an answer to either of the questions we're going to be talking about. So without further ado, I'd like to share my screen and introduce you to what we are going to be looking at over the next little while. Okay, just need that up there. So if all is well, I could be able to remotely make that work. Okay, so in the webinar, I'm going to give you an introduction about who I am and what muscle response testing with mindset priming does. Research on high performance and commitment. And I mentioned commitment earlier on as something that I think is great to give people more commitment towards how they want their lives to be. Nuggets from mindset priming. There are 4 insights. And one is about limiting aspirations. One is about achieving sustainable change. One is about the 4 barriers to success. And the last is about instinctive high performance. And we'll have a little look at each of those. And in the conclusion, we'll be looking at how mindset priming concepts can be integrated with your work, how to boost your commitment and that of your clients, and hopefully time for your questions. So the promotional literature that came out with this note about this webinar, I hope what you're going to get from it is the confidence to raise your sights and stretch your personal professional goals, an understanding of how easily MRT enables people to stretch their goals to the optimum when linked with appropriate psychological concepts, recognition of what 4 things inhibit our progress and success, and how easily a balance can remove those barriers, appreciation of what key elements of commitment people need to develop to stretch their goals and release their handbrake, knowledge of the business benefits that can follow from applying the insights, and the desire to have psychology elements available in your balances and or mentoring work. So that's what you were promised, and that's what I'm intending to give you. This diagram is about who I am and what muscle response testing makes possible and what mindset priming does. I see my life and my work all about helping people to change, helping people to be happier, and helping people to be more successful, whatever that may mean, whether that's a business success or a financial success or greater happiness or more fulfillment, whatever that success means for people. So the W is about what to change, the H is about how to change, and the O is about the order of change, which is a sort of double-barrel thing. It's the order in terms of the scale or magnitude. It's also the order in terms of priority. And this will make sense to you all, I think, in terms of the way we as kinesiologists work, in terms of testing what is out of balance, how to fix it, and what the priorities are. What comes from the way I work is that people have the confidence to aspire to their ideal future. How to change, they understand how to set your mental sat-nav. And in terms of what to change, how to release your mental handbrake. I'd like to look at some research by this man, Dr. Bandiera of Stanford University, hugely respected psychologist. And this research he was doing some years ago was on self-efficacy, which is what we individually or collectively believe we can do. And he put it into 3 aspects: culture, competence, and commitment. And culture, he said, was about having an opportunity to perform and being in a supportive environment. And then there was competence and commitment. And this slide has generated lots of business for me, lots of clients. And it might well help you depending which areas of your clients come from. Because I would ask, if I was giving a presentation to a room full of business people, it might all be from the same company, or they might be a range of directors across a wider audience. I would ask them which was more important to them, competence or commitment that their people had. And back when this first came out, so 30 odd years ago, they would say competence. But from about 20 years ago up till now, very much people stress no, commitment is the more important of the two, perhaps by sort of 70% to 30%, something of that sort, or certainly 60-40. And Bandera broke these down, competency broke down as knowledge and skills, and commitment he breaks down as self-motivation and self-efficacy, this word he was researching, what we believe we can do. And he broke those last two further down, self-motivation into, excuse me, creativity, energy, and drive, and self-efficacy he broke down into confidence, self-esteem, and belief. So at this point, I would ask my audience, these business people I was talking to, commitment is, we've just said 60 or 70% important compared to compared to competence. How many of you know how to develop those ingredients of self-motivation and self-efficacy for yourself or for your people? And almost no hands went up back then. A few hands go up now. So they've just agreed that generating commitment is hugely important, and they've no idea how to do so. And the checkbooks came out, quite literally, when I inserted that next element into the slide, that the ABC of Success workshops, the concepts in there, would teach them how to develop those elements of commitment. So let's have a look at the ABC model. This is a two-dimensional model that I created to help people see where all these different concepts belonged and how they gel together. It actually is part of a bigger three-dimensional model, but we'll stick to a two-dimensional model today. The ABC of Success model, the A is our aspirations, the B is the being that we are, our current behavior, and the C is our conditioning, which may be holding us back because of the beliefs and so on that we've absorbed from our past. And that's a typical coaching model. Where are you now? Where do you want to get to? What's stopping you? Let's make a plan. But the ABC model goes deeper. There's a further letter at the subconscious level, if you like, below the line. The D is our description of ourselves. The D is what is driving our current behavior. Because the behavior we display in a natural, free-flowing way today is a mirror image of our subconscious description of ourselves, which we'll later on call our self-concept. I hope that's sort of straightforward and makes sense to you all. So if we move on to the first insight of the four that we're going to look at, and this insight's about when until now have you limited your ambitions? And this is about blind spots. Because we see things differently, all of us. It's said that often, I think, by the police, that if three people observe a traffic accident from different points of view at a crossroads and they write up their notes, the police might well think there were three different accidents. So it's absolutely fine that we see things differently. We maybe even hear things differently. So how our mind works and the interactions between conscious and subconscious. Just a summary, what we believe and how we perceive things has a great deal to do with our past experiences and impacts our aspirations, our optimism, our commitment, and our success. I think that's a fairly straightforward statement. So let's have a little look. We're going to do this once or twice this morning, a little look at how perhaps we see things differently. If I was to ask you all to tell you what that was, I think you'd straightforwardly say it was a horse's head. No problem at all. Thank you to the same artist. If I asked you what that was, you would say probably, some might say a frog, some might say a toad. Everybody happy with that? I would guess. You're actually looking at the same picture. On this one of the toad, if I can illustrate it with the cursor from my computer, those are the horse's ears. That's the horse's eye. That's the horse's nostrils. That's the horse's mouth. And this is the horse's mane. And let's pop it back there to you so you can see that. It just depends which way you look at it, whether you see the horse, whether you see the frog. Very simple. So what has all this got to do with aiming higher confidently? Well, the way we see things, what we see, what we don't see, what we hear, what we don't hear, is controlled by something called our reticular activating system, known as our RAS for short. So aiming higher confidently is about putting your RAS to work. And I say that carefully because otherwise people think I'm telling them to get off their backside. So let's have a look at how your RAS does work and what it's all about. First question, are you ready to accept accountability for achieving your goals, the changes that you want. Because accountability is absolutely linked to the RAS. And the easiest example to give you on that is that of a couple having a baby. When the baby is born, given that the RAS, the job of the RAS is to be a filter that allows through to your conscious awareness things that are important for you, valuable to you, or even possibly a threat to you. The baby's born, the parents are at home, the baby cries in the night. Now, traditionally, the mother will wake and look after the child. Some people have said to me and argued very forcibly, this is all about the maternal instinct. And I've politely suggested that actually it's to do with the reticular activating system and accountability. And this was borne out wonderfully for me in one workshop where I was getting into a little bit of deep water on this maternal instinct subject with one of the participants, by a man in the group I was working with who said, could he contribute? And I said I was delighted for him to do. And he said, well, when my wife was pregnant, I did a deal with her. He said, it's a deal I'm rather ashamed of, but the deal was that while she was breastfeeding the baby, if it cried in the night, she would get up and look after it, and I would be able to sleep on. And the deal I did, he said, was that once she'd stopped feeding the baby, if it cried in the night, I would wake up and look after it and she could sleep on. He said, what was shameful was I didn't think that would work. I expected that she would wake up because of the maternal instinct and I would be able to sleep. But he said, that didn't happen. He said, once my wife had finished feeding the baby, no longer breastfeeding, she made a point of saying to me, okay, I've done my bit, now it's up to you to look after the baby if it cries in the night. She handed accountability over to me, he said. And to my amazement, she slept right through the night if it cried in the night, and I was one getting up looking after it. So that's a very simple example of accountability. In terms of where have you experienced the RAS working, one very simple example, which many of you may be able to relate to, is when you buy a different car. It doesn't have to be a new car, but you go to a showroom perhaps and you pick up this gleaming car. Let's say it's an Audi. Let's say it's a blue Audi. You pick up this blue Audi, you invest lots of money buying your blue Audi, and you leave the showroom and you go driving. And some of you know already what I'm going to be suggesting, I think. Because what do you see as you're driving away from the showroom? Oh, there's one, there's one, there's one. Everybody's driving blue Audis today. Isn't that? That's very reassuring news to know that people think a blue Audi is a wonderful car. There were just as many blue Audis on the road yesterday. Why didn't you see them then? Because when you've invested a lot of money in something, it's very reassuring to know that you've made a good investment. So having made the investment, your filter system will allow through to you information that confirms you've made a good choice. So let's move on a bit. Do you need to rethink realistic goal setting in the context of aiming higher? And this is a really interesting one. There are places, and I'm thinking particularly of the German culture, where if you set a business goal in Germany, it's very important to be able to demonstrate exactly how you're going to achieve it. It's only seen as realistic if that's the goal, and step by step, I can show you how I'm going to get there. That makes it a realistic goal. That is dreadful goal setting. That is not aiming higher confidently. When you understand how your RAS works, you learn that it's quite exciting, quite fun, and extremely helpful to set your goal without necessarily having any idea how to get there at all. If you do know how to get there, that's fine. But stretching a goal beyond the point of the knowing how to is really efficient. What it does is to open up the filter system. If I can give you a corporate example of that for a moment, which is really great fun. There was a company called Storage Tech. They built computers. There was things about the size of this room in those days, very, very big computers. And I was about to take the board through this workshop of mine. And the sales director's problem was that he believed they could sell 14 computers in a year. He said, if we can do that, that would be fantastic. The company will thrive, we'll get out of the difficulties we're in, etc. But he said, my top sales managers can only, between them, conjure up the idea of selling 7. He said, if you can get me to help them sell 14, this will be fantastic. So we began the workshop, and we got beyond the point of explaining the RAS to him, and we also had covered the point about the difference in energy that results from imposing a goal on someone and letting them choose their own. And there was a lunch break. And he came back from the lunch break, about the color of the background of these slides, ashen. I said, is everything all right? He said, I'm in shock. I said, what's happened? He said, well, I've had lunch with my sales team, and they're no longer aiming for 7. I said, oh, are they aiming for 14? He said, no, they're aiming for 30. I think they're nuts. I couldn't dissuade them, but they talked among themselves and they decided to aim for 30. Okay. Well, in those days, the organization I was associated with was not good at planning ahead of time how to measure the benefits of people going through these workshops. And it was over a year later, I was back there talking with the HR director who brought me into the company. And we were chatting away, and he was saying that everything was very good in the company, very good energy, very good atmosphere, everybody cooperating well, et cetera, everybody very happy. I said, yes, but what have you achieved from investing in the program? He said, well, I don't know. I said, well, how many computers did you sell? He said, I don't know. I have no idea. But he got on the phone to the sales director who happened to be there. And the answer was they'd sold 28. Within 1 year, they had sold 28, 4 times what the managers had thought was possible, and exactly double what the sales director thought was possible. Now, one reason that company was in trouble was that the sales team was told that they failed because they hadn't sold 30, but that's something else we can come to later. But let's look at this in terms of the RAS and setting goals higher. If I can explain it this way. When the managers were aiming to sell 7, their filter system here was scanning their environment for ways in which it was possible to find the way to sell 7. The way to sell any more than that was not relevant, not valuable, so none of that would have got through their filter. Had they aimed at the level of 14 that the sales director wanted, their filter would have been scanning for how to sell 14. When they set their goal to 30, that filter system was scanning all over the place for how to sell 30, and they sold 28. They found a way of selling 28. Really remarkable. So let's move on a little bit more on this. How ambitious can I be, or can we be? And this comes back, I think, to Bandura's research. Someone asked me recently in an interview, how do I cope with someone who's got completely unrealistic goals? What is there such a thing as a completely unrealistic goal? And the only way I could really describe it was to use a rubber band. If this sum over here is where this sort of current reality situation, and this sum over here is representing what we're aiming for, and the rubber band is about the energy we're generating to bring about a change. The more I stretch that rubber band, the more energy there is for it to close down and get back to its original shape. So it follows from that that the further I stretch it, the more energy there's going to be to close it, unless I stretch it too far and the rubber band snaps. So in our terms, provided, going back to Bandura's work on self-efficacy, if we can stretch our goal to the limit of our self-efficacy, we've got the optimum amount of energy in that rubber band to bring about the change, the drive and energy that was the self-motivation in that diagram of his as well. If we set a goal consciously that is beyond our subconscious belief in what we can do, there's going to be no energy there at all, because the subconscious just doesn't buy into that. It's sort of Walter Mitty nonsense stuff. So there will be no energy and drive at all. Let's just, there's an MD I've worked with for 25 years, and he's taken me to quite a number of businesses, and he understands this stuff very well. And he makes notes on what his team says back to him in terms of their commitment to what he's trying to achieve. And it's quite fun, perhaps, to look at a couple of examples. this was a branch of GKN, an element of, within GKN, and they're very happy for me to use these slides. And the MD knew about the RAS and his team didn't. What had happened was that the group level of GKN had decreed they were going to have an energy saving of 10% next year right across the company. And Martin, a friend of mine, client of mine, was introducing this idea to his top team in this branch of the company. Okay, what's your energy reduction target? We have to be realistic. I think 1% would be reasonable. That's his team. He's the one in the black print ink. The red ink is his team replying. You're joking. It's what we've achieved in the past. But it's nowhere near enough. We should go for 10%. He knows that's the group level instruction. That's impossible. I don't care. That's what the target's going to be. He got better as a leader after that, but at that point, that's actually what he said. But we don't know how to do it. Classic, not understanding the RAS. True, but we'll find a way. The man who did understand the RAS. If you say so, absolutely no commitment to it at all. Just about zero commitment to success. And we'll look later, perhaps, if we have time, at what happened in that organization when they applied the concepts we're talking about today. So let's move on to insight 2. Which is why, until now, his initial progress tended to revert to the earlier level. And this is about the self-concept, as we've said. So the description of yourself is a self-concept, which is made up of your self-talk that creates your self-image and your self-efficacy, what you believe you can do. So what I'm suggesting is that for sustainable personal progress, if that's current reality and that's your vision of how you'd like things to be, and that's a conscious decision of what you want your life to become like, at the subconscious level, S-C for subconscious, also S-C for self-concept. Our free-flowing behavior I suggested to you earlier is a reflection of our self-concept. So this diagram may explain, I don't know if any of you made New Year's resolutions this year or any other year, and if they work or don't work. They very seldom work, and this will illustrate part of the reason why. We start consciously changing our behavior to move towards the vision we have of the new us. And the further we go, the more struggle it is. The more struggle it is because we haven't changed the self-concept. And we will go back to being like us as fast as we jolly well can. We're going to look into another element of that in a moment. So the message very simply is we achieve sustainable results by adjusting our self-concept. If we adjust the self-concept rather than working on our behavior, what I call becomes aligned foundations on which we can sustain and maintain the new us that we wanted to become. Okay, I've been talking for a while, about half an hour, and I think you need a break. So I'm going to give you a little activity to do. If you've seen this before, please keep the answer to yourself and don't put it in the chat. But as and when you see the answer for yourself and get one or other of the answers, there are two, please put it in the chat. And as soon as we have a successful answer, Julie will let me know and I can share the answers with you. So the creative challenge is on a spare piece of paper somewhere. I'll just put the instructions on the screen and you can just follow them as you read them. First instruction. Second instruction. And now the challenge. There's two options. There's the first one. And there's the second one. And Julie, if you'll let me know, please, otherwise I might need to speak out loud, Julie, let me know when you've got the solution, because I can't, of course, see the chat. No answers yet. Well, no correct answers yet. What fun. So what have we got? We've got 60, no, we've got 70 people in the room. And it's a fairly simple challenge.
I've got 9.
Okay. I think I better show you the answers because we don't want to linger too long with. Before I show you the answers, reflect if you would. And again, if you feel bold or brave, put your answer in the chat. When people are asked to do these sort of activities, very often in their mind, they say to themselves, oh, I hate these things. I'm no good at these things. I can never do these things. So if anyone was having any of those sort of negative thoughts about the activity when they were struggling to do it, it might be very sporting to put them in the chat box. But my bet is that several of you who were struggling would have been saying similar things.
Yeah.
Sorry?
Yeah, somebody's got the answer. The only problem with the chat room is we can't see who's actually put it in.
Oh, can you not?
No, we can't.
That's strange. Oh, that's very odd. I thought normally it told you who was giving you the answers. That's
so we'll have to get people to be honest and say who gave the answer.
Yes.
Because there's only one person who's given the answer.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if the person who's given the answer, oh, okay. Well, let's put the answers up on the screen, and the person who put it there can tell Clive who it is. Thank you, Clive.
Yeah.
So the solutions. There's the Roman number 10. One additional line makes the number 9. One additional line makes the number 6, which I was careful not to pronounce. Very simple. And the alternative solution is to take the Roman number 9 and turn it upside down and put one line through the bottom of it, and you get the Roman number 6. So it's a bit of a fun activity. It was a bit of a break from listening to me, but also is an exercise for some of you in listening to your self-talk. Clive, have we heard who got that answer right and deserves a signed copy of the book?
There was one person, I don't know who it is, who typed in the word 6. They typed in the word 6.
Maybe they could type their name in now.
They were the first one.
Maybe they could type their name in the chat room to you.
Send me a note afterwards and we'll...
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's slightly puzzled me that you can't identify who they are, but that's a shame. Okay. So to move on, still on the Insight 2, and this time though we're going to look at self-talk, which is the exercise I was just doing with you to get you to think about your self-talk as you were doing that exercise. We can talk ourselves into success, and to a degree we can talk ourselves out of success or reduce the possibility of success. One of my favorite examples of this, and I can't see the audience, so I don't know how many are male versus not male, and in this day and age it doesn't matter because all sorts of people carry handbags. It used to baffle me completely that people find it difficult to find their keys in their handbag. Time and again, years ago when I was single in London, I would take someone to dinner, drive them home, and they'd sit in the car looking at me, looking at the ceiling, rummaging in their bag, saying, I can't find my keys. Well, keys are shiny things if you're looking in the bag. They've got sharp edges if you're feeling in the bag. They jangle if you're listening to what's going on when you're looking in the bag. So how is it that it's difficult to find keys in a handbag? And then I came across this information. And whenever after that someone was struggling to find their keys in the handbag, I would say to them, would you humor me? And they'd look at me. I said, would you take your hand out of your bag? I took the hand out of the bag. So I want you to look me in the eye and say out loud, I'm going to put my hand in my bag and take my keys out. And they'd look at me and say, I'm going to put my hand in my bag and take my keys out. Oh, and there the keys would be in their hand. It's so simple, it's great fun. And part of what this is all about is that one of the jobs of our subconscious is to protect us from pain, protect us from looking stupid. And if I say I can't do something and promptly do it, that looks pretty stupid. So if we say, I can't do it, our subconscious goes to work to sort of, if you like, deaden our senses as best it can to the feel of the keys, the sound of the keys. Indeed, why not look at me rather than in the bag so you can't, there's no risk of seeing the keys. Try it for yourself sometimes. I gave a talk on self-efficacy in the workplace to a psychology group within a merchant bank in London some years ago. And I'd flagged up the possibility that they might want to know about keys in the handbag. And at the end of the group discussion, I hadn't covered that. And the host shut the meeting down. And what about the keys in the handbag? So I was given another 5 minutes to explain about the keys in the handbag, after which, when we were having a drink, one of the clearly very, very bright participants came rushing up to me saying, thank you so much for the keys in the handbag. That's magic. And she said, you don't understand. I have no trouble finding my keys in my handbag. But that principle they're talking about, in fact, the way we can talk ourselves into success or out of success, applies to so many things. She said, I'm really going to take that away and be very grateful for that. Thank you. And it's a very simple one. So moving on self-talk. The MD I talked about before, the first company he took me into was a company called New Holland who made tractors. They're Italian owned. They'd had 25 years of failure. They hadn't met budget for 25 years, and the Italians were fed up with them. And when Martin took the job on, he was shocked to hear that the first thing the Italians told him to do was to sack the entire board because they'd been useless for so long. Martin doesn't like work like that. He's a very, very good leader. But again, just as he did with the GKN group, he made a note of the kind of self-talk that he heard from his board of directors when he told them that he intended to meet budget that year. And this is what they said. We can never achieve budget. There's no way this will ever work. Don't be stupid. Be realistic. That's not possible. We don't have the resources. We tried that X years ago. The Italians won't let us. Fantastic stuff. Again, commitment to success, almost zero. Well, I can tell you now that he didn't sack anybody. He kept the entire board. He shuffled them around a little bit and brought one new person in. And later on, as I say again, if we've got time, we can look at the results of applying the concepts we're talking about to reverse this kind of negative expectation and negative self-talk. Back in a sort of individual example of self-talk again, I mean, extraordinary in coming back to us as kinesiologists. There's a wonderful technique from Educate that helps people to read, and I'm sure many of you know it. And it's only failed once with me with a 5-year-old boy. I used to do a lot of work with dyslexic people. One 5-year-old boy this didn't work with, and I always alert people who invite me to help them. This might not work because it hasn't always worked. But this was a lady in her 30s. I was on a workshop, and the host invited her to read from the manual, and she said simply, I don't read. And so the host passed on and got someone else to read. And I went up to her in the interval. I just politely began talking, and she explained that no, she did not read. She struggled. If she read, it was syllable by that sort of reading. And I'm sure many of you know that there's an Educate correction whereby you rub some pressure points, rotate your eyes and say your alphabet at the same time, and then reverse the process. And that helps to integrate things. And I did the exercise with her. I listened to her reading first of all, did the exercise with her, and she read fluently, completely fluently. I said, well, there you go. You've got the exercise. That'll help anytime you want it to. And it's one of the, I'm sure many of you know it. It's a wonderful, wonderful exercise. And if you don't know it, you might want to add it to your repertoire. And I went back on a repeat workshop 3 months later. And this is the point of the story. Because she rushed up to me and said, thank you so much. It's made such a difference. I'm hoovering up newspapers, books, magazines. I just read everything. I said, oh, that's great. How often do you do the exercise? She said, what exercise? Her self-talk had completely changed from I don't read, I can't read, to I can read fluently. And once she'd read fluently, she just read. There was an expectation that she would be, I was fascinated because I'd always been told you would need to do the exercise on a fairly regular basis. Not for her, never again. Her self-talk, all I can imagine the answer was that her self-talk had changed into I read fluently. There was nothing wrong with my reading. I can read anytime I like. And she did. So self-talk is a very powerful thing. Let's move on with the self-concept. Oh, I beg your pardon. I'm so sorry I didn't show you this one. New Holland's positive self-talk. I forgot. He made a note of this as well. This slide won't take long. There wasn't any. My apologies for not showing that sooner. Moving on to self-image, the next part of this self-concept. Self-image is developed by our self-talk. We have a self-image, and multifaceted self-image of many aspects of our life. And around each one is a comfort zone. And I'm sure that's a phrase you've heard. We like being in our comfort zone to the extent that if circumstances take us out of our comfort zone, we get back into it as quickly as we can. And there's fun exercises we could do with that if this was a live gathering. Where this has been very interesting, some of my work and some of the work that some of you may do is working with people, working with prisoners, first of all. Talked with extensively some prisoners and done some work in prisons. And one of the difficulties in helping them is that prison is their comfort zone. They see themselves belonging in prison. They know they do bad things. They're surrounded by peers who understand them, speak the same language. They don't have to take responsibility for their lives. They're looked after, they're fed. And it's a safer environment for them than the outside is, to the extent that sometimes when they are released, some of them will do the stupidest and most blatantly obvious of crimes to get arrested and back into prison. Similarly, when I've worked with people who are homeless, working with a homeless charity, working kinesiologically with them, really, really interesting to help put them in touch with a picture of the future that they believe they could maintain and cope with, and help them get out of the comfort zone almost that the homeless situation has been for some time with them, where again they are looked after and nurtured and not responsible for themselves. This taking responsibility for yourself seems to be one of the big steps that is a challenge for people when they've been homeless or a prisoner, or and that's an area we can do wonderful things to help in. So on comfort zones, I'm going to show you another corporate example at one level, but it actually is more than a corporate example. It's to do with one individual deciding to change his self-image. He's a man called Jim Barry. I was working with Canada Life Ireland, a life insurance company, and this is all about self-image and comfort zones. And way back in 1999, he came on a workshop that I was running. And after the workshop, he said to me, I finished last year as the #2 salesman in Canada Life on 72,000 points of business. I can see now that being at that level of success took me out of my comfort zone. I self-regulated back down to being #25 salesman by May of this year. And I was working with him in the autumn, I think September or October. And so before the next year started, he did some thinking. He reflected, he worked on his self-image, he decided to work on his self-image, and he decided that he wanted to be the #1 salesman. In terms of how high can you set your goals, we're coming back to this again and linking it to self-image and comfort zones. At the end of 2020, he had achieved 192,000 points, more than double what he did in 1998. The following year, he did 560,000 points, which was more than double what anybody else had ever achieved, and generated £2.25 million of Irish pounds of annual new business. What I didn't ask him ever was, regrettably, what he'd set his goal for the year 2000. Was he aiming for 200,000 points? Was he aiming for 100,000 points? I don't know, but we'll come back later to the importance, which I mentioned before, setting the goal to the limit of your self-efficacy. And the point is, as you then move towards success there, you can perhaps stretch the goal and stretch the goal. And that is how he ended up doing those quite extraordinary achievements. So at the end of this insight, where have we got to? We perform in line with our self-image. And on this scale of 0 to 10, let's say that's a 5. And our comfort zone perhaps is between 4 and 6. And what regulates us there is our self-talk, priming our self-image. Our self-image dictates our performance. After we perform, we say either, yeah, that's like me, I'm a 5 number of salesperson, or if we slip down to just under 4, oh, that's not like me, that's not, I'm better than that, and our subconscious gets us back up to where we belong. It's called the self-talk cycle. So the best way to generate lasting progress, what I'm suggesting, is to change your self-talk and your self-image, which is a comfortable process. So when you decide to set a goal up here to be a 10-level performer, that needs new self-talk. If you work at that correctly and work on your self-image correctly, you will end up with a new self-image, a new level of performance, and around that will be a new comfort zone. So you will stay at that. That will be a sustainable, that will be lasting progress when you apply this approach to change. Okay. Now, I think you've had enough of PowerPoint for a while. This next insight is about the 4 things that hold us back. So I'm going to stop screen sharing for now. And just talk you through those 4 things, the B, E, and H, and A. This is the bit that's the handbrake, as I called it earlier. And the B is about beliefs. And a lot of you will be familiar with this, I'm quite sure, because it's straightforward stuff. But one of the most remarkable things about beliefs is a concept called cognitive dissonance that I find fascinating. This is about when we have a very firm belief about something. I'm not talking religious beliefs, but a very firm belief about either the way the world is or the way we are, or then, as I said earlier, our subconscious's job, one of the subconscious jobs, is to protect us from pain, protect us from recognizing that we're making a mistake, perhaps. So in this context, if someone has a very firm belief about something that is an erroneous belief, their subconscious will do their best to block evidence from them that would demonstrate they got that belief from. And the most obvious example of that, and tragic example of that, is people with anorexia. As you probably know, people with anorexia can get skeletally thin, dangerously thin, to the point that they are on the point of death, until perhaps they're rescued and taken into hospital because they have slimmed down so much. And they've done that because their belief is that they are large. To the extent that you can take an anorexic who is pencil thin and put them in front of a mirror and ask them to draw their reflection, and they will draw the reflection of a large person. Their senses, their perception is completely distorted by this erroneous belief. The most extraordinary thing I ever heard came as a result of a kinesiology balance. I'd worked with a boy, I was working with a boy of 12 who was so dyslexic, he'd been thrown out of 3 schools, he'd been thrown out of 3 special schools, he was branded unteachable, unmanageable, and uncontrollable. And his mother brought him to a clinic I had in London some years ago. And I gave him a balance. 3-in-1 concepts, and had a great deal to do. Their approach was very effective, very often working with dyslexics and, of course, EK as well. And the balance combined elements of both of those things. And at the end of the balance, I said I was going to give him, and I told him in advance this would happen, I was going to give him an exercise that would help him sort of integrate his mind. And this was the same exercise I did with the lady who didn't read. So I began describing the activity to him about rubbing the points, rotating his eyes, and said, and you say your alphabet? And he said, I can't. I said, what do you mean you can't say your alphabet? He said, I can't say my alphabet, I don't know it, I've never learnt it. Well, I've never been told that he was that unteachable. He's such a bright 12-year-old boy. And I didn't want to damage his self-esteem any more than I could help. So I said, oh, well, fine, just show me what you can do. And this is not the point of the story, but he then, quite perfectly and beautifully, metronomically evenly, said his alphabet straight through from A to Z without a pause. And his mother was there with her mouth open and her eyes open, absolutely gobsmacked. I was pretty astonished. And I said to him, that was great. He said, what was? I said, you just said your alphabet. He looked me straight in the eye and said, I didn't, I couldn't have, I don't know it. That's cognitive dissonance for you again. His belief was so strong. Since he was, what, 4 or 5 or younger even maybe, he'd been told by teachers, by his parents, by peers at school, by his siblings, most importantly probably by himself, I am so thick, I am so stupid, I don't know my alphabet. And that had become such a strong belief that he could say it in one sentence and a couple of sentences later deny that he had. If I ever hear anything stranger in my life, I would be amazed. So let's move on to the E of expectations. And this is a really interesting one. And it links back to self-talk, all these things too. But one of the areas where I've found our work as kinesiologists very rewarding is working with people with cancer, especially if they've been given a diagnosis that is incurable. Because their world, certainly from the experience of the clients I've been working with, is that they go through life and they've got a test coming up next week or the week after, and then a few days after that they'll get the results, and they'll be like the results they had last time, which were really bad results and gloomy results and depressing results, and their head is full of negative expectations because of, and they can't make plans. They don't feel they can, in normal times, forgetting the times we're in now, plan to go to theatres or plan to have holidays because of. And with the mindset priming approach of linking the psychology with the kinesiology, it's possible to put them in touch with something that they actually believe they could look forward to and enjoy. And it energizes them in the most wonderful way, especially if you get rid of the sort of the negative thoughts and sabotage at the back of their mind. And their sort of self-talk changes, their expectations change, and they start thinking about managing to enjoy the time they're with us. But a much simpler way, perhaps, of looking at expectations is I play golf. And golf is a wonderful demonstrator of what mindset priming can do. And by contrast, I play golf with some fairly similarly senior gentlemen. And one of them says, yeah, I expect to get a par on the first 2 holes. And he regularly does. And his handicap isn't anywhere near, it's nothing like that good, but he just regularly pars the first 2 holes, expects to par the first 2 holes, and therefore normally does par the first 2 holes. Another delightful man I play golf with was captain of the golf club. And he was quite upset because he didn't understand why it took him so long to get going. He was a very good golfer, but he always messed up the first 2 or 3 holes and then got going and played well after that. And this was his expectations. He got to the first tee expecting to mess up the first 2 or 3 holes and then get better. Once he sort of changed that way of thinking, he began playing well from the first tee onwards. It was such fun. So beliefs, expectations, habits is the next one in this part of the handbrake. And they're very straightforward. They allow us to free flow, and they're terrific, provided they are helping us. And sometimes we, what's called, lock onto a habit of this is the way to do things. We really thought it through. We looked at all the options. This is the best decision. This is the way to do it. And maybe we took that decision 10 years ago or even longer ago, and we're still doing that habit because 10 years ago, that was the best way to do it. And maybe circumstances have changed. Maybe technology has changed. The silliest example, but one that's very easy to give. I used to fly to Seattle on business quite regularly. And before I began working with the association that required me to do that, you flew from London and you flew over New York and you refueled at Chicago and then went on to Seattle. And coming back, you would fly over Chicago and refuel at New York before coming on to London. But happily, by the time I was doing it, they were just going straight through, no need to refuel. You waved at New York, you waved at Chicago, and you landed at Seattle. Anything wrong with that? Well, yes, some bright spark pointed out after they've been doing that for a while. Why is the route from Seattle to London via Chicago and New York. It's much quicker to go over the pole. They were so used to taking the Chicago, New York, London route and vice versa that that was automatically in their mind. That's the way we go. That's the flight path that we take. And it was just a habit that kept them flying on that route when they didn't need to, because they didn't need to refuel anymore. Something else that's a habit we're going to come to in a minute is careless language. And this is, I think, great fun. We habitually use language, and very often we don't recognize that it's inhibiting us, handicapping us, limiting us. So the A, which we're coming to now, is attitudes. And in the mindset priming workshops, the ABC workshops, there are about 35 or so concepts. I originally sent a list of 50 to a couple of hundred people who'd been through my workshops with me and approved and liked them. And I got about 25% replies to my request that each of them gave me a list of the top 10 things of the 50 that they had really found helpful. And the concept I'm coming to now is the only one that everybody put in their top 10. So it's likely that this will be of value to some of you, if not all of you. What they ticked as really significant was something called creative avoidance, sometimes called procrastination, but I like the creative avoidance. It sums it up so well. And one of the things that triggers creative avoidance is attitudes, which is where we are now. And attitudes, if you like, I just think in terms of, if I'm enthusiastic about something, my attitude is, yep, let's get on with it, terrific, I'm leaning forwards. If I'm not enthusiastic about something, my attitude tends to be, ooh, I'm going to back away from that a bit. And one thing that triggers creative avoidance, if some prospect comes up, it may be the washing up, it may be the hoovering, it may be weeding the garden, maybe all sorts of things. Ooh, I'm not very keen on that. And we'll find something else to do instead. We'll just go and find something that we will creatively avoid what we don't like, because we have an attitude about not liking it. That's one reason we creatively avoid. And what we want, of course, is the drive and energy that comes with the self-motivation bit of drive and energy of, yes, 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 I like this, let's get on with it. That's what we need to try and generate, rather than this backing away and creative avoidance. But the other thing, there's something else that generates creative avoidance. And if you can each of you imagine for a moment, please, putting your left hand up in the air. Imagine we were face to face and you were putting your left hand up in the air, and I put my right hand on your left hand and I start pushing. I'm pretty sure that your reactions would have been, if I asked you what you did, would be that you pushed back. It's a spontaneous, natural thing that we do. We don't like being pushed around. We don't like being coerced. Very simple. Clive, if I could call on you in the chat room again, possibly, to make some notes or note what people put in the chat room. What I'd like you, each of you, please, to put in the chat room is, let's get a list of the things that you have to do in life. Whether it's boring things like housework, whether it's things the government requires you to do, whatever it is, just those sort of, what are the have-tos in your life at the moment? And when you've got some in the list, Clive or Julie, if you could call them out to me, that would be interesting. So just Josh, put in the chat room some of the have-tos in your life. Are we getting any answers in there?
We're getting lots in there. There's lots of things that people have to do.
Okay, call them out to me.
Okay, shopping, cooking, cleaning, working, washing up, have to tend to the pots in the front yard.
Okay, if I was running a live seminar, when I run live seminars, I put all these have-tos that come out up on a flip chart. And then I revert, I'm so old, I'm showing my age. I revert back to what used to happen when I was at school, and I play the teacher and I get out my red pen and I put a great big red cross through the whole lot.
Right.
Because there are apparently only 2 have-tos in our life. And none of you as yet have listed them in the chat room. And some people may dispute these 2 by all means. But what I've been led to understand is that the only 2 things that we actually have to do in our life, we have to die, and some people dispute that. And apparently, according to quantum physics, we have to take up space. The really sort of eye-opening possibility is that everything else is a matter of our free choice, provided we accept the consequences of our decisions. And where I'm going to with this is that once we recognize we have free choice, if we also recognize that we don't like being coerced by other people, and we don't like being coerced by ourselves, the point is, if we use coercive language on ourselves, we go into creative avoidance mode again. So words like I have to, I must, I should, I've got to, I ought to, I call them the 4-letter words, as the naughty words we don't want to use. ORRT is a well-known 4-letter word, SHUD is a well-known 4-letter word, etc. Use of these words, these coercive words, generates creative avoidance, and we put off doing chores that actually need to get done. It would be much healthier to say, okay, I need to get that done, I want to get that done, I choose to get that done, let's get it done and out of the way and get on and enjoy things. It would be a much healthier way of approaching things that we don't enjoy, we don't particularly look forward to, or delegate them. By all means, delegate them if you can. But if it's something that you are actually going to need to do, be careful to change your language, get rid of your coercive language. It would be my suggestion. To the extent that I would say, because this is a habit, this is the habit I talked about of careless language. I encourage you to consider whether or not you might want to prime your RAS to alert you to when you use coercive language. Because I catch myself doing it sometimes still. If I had a $5 for every time I hear someone saying have to, must, should, got to, ought to, after I've introduced them to these concepts, I'd have made a fortune by now. Because it is a habit and people don't necessarily decide to change that habit. So I invite you to consider, you might want to change the habit, you might want to prime your RAS to alert you to coercive words. Okay, so time for another activity. There might well be an audience of this size, a number of you who are to one degree or another dyslexic. I certainly am to a degree. So this next exercise, you may have seen it before. If you have, then please don't put your entry in the book, because I say the winner will again get a copy of the book. Let me go back to sharing my screen for the exercise.
Jeremy, whilst you're doing that, can I say
Yep.
to people, when they put the answer in the chat room, put your name in there as well, please, so I know who it is.
Funny enough, I got the names in my chat room. I don't know why. It said who they were from, but that's just maybe lucky to me.
That's the difference between a PC and a Mac.
Maybe it is. Okay. So this is the next exercise. Again, put your answers in the chat room, please. I asked if you were dyslexic because the classics with dyslexics is reading, writing, and arithmetic. The writing's been done for you. I'm going to get you to do some reading and then get you to do some arithmetic. There's a sentence. I'd just like you to read it through. Okay, and everyone's had time for that, I would imagine. Now, you need to be fast on this to get your answer, to get the book, to get the prize. So fast begins with the letter F for Freddie. This time when you read the sentence, please count how many times the letter F appears in the sentence. All right, off you go. Stick the answers in the chat as soon as you get them. And when the correct answer comes up, Julie will let us know that it's come up, but won't tell us what it is yet. So but it sounds to me as if answers are going in the chat, but not the right answer, which is interesting. Still no sign of the right answer, Judy? Or Clive? What? How interesting. Okay, I think I'd better give some help. Really interesting. Clive, can I hear what answers you have got in the chat?
Yep, I've got 4, 7, 6, 10, 5, 8, 5, 5, 8.
Okay, okay. Then we have actually got some correct answers. Sorry, confusion there. All sorts of different answers, from quite a short sentence, from intelligent people reading a sentence. From 4 to 10, I think the range went.
Yep.
Those of you who said 4 may perhaps be the best readers in the group. There are different points of view on this. Those that said 8 got it right. So the first one to get 8 certainly gets the book. And if you can't see who that is, I hopefully will be able to, Clive. The one who said 10, I'd love to talk to about that one. That's really interesting. But let's look at the ones who said 4. My guess is, for those of you who said 4, if you count the number of times the word of appears in the sentence, of fruit, of choice, of staying, of having, they would be your missing 4, because 8, as I said, is the correct answer. And a very learned man, from his sort of qualifications, initials, and title, wrote an article in a paper a few years ago explaining that the reason people get this wrong is that of is a little word and they just skip over the little words. And I nearly wrote it back to him, but I thought it'd be a bit mean given how qualified and respected he was. Because all this is actually about is that when we're taught to read, we think we're looking at the letters and the words, but we're actually pronouncing them in our head as we read them. And while we think we're looking for Fs, we're actually listening for Fs. And the word of sounds as if it's spelt with a V. So a great many people leave out the Vs, or leave out the Fs in the word of. And it's a fun exercise, but it just, again, goes back to saying that we look at things differently, we see things differently. And we just have these different ways of, our conditioning, if you like, in this case, our conditioning with the reading may lead us to see the Fs, and it may equally lead us to just stick with 4. So moving on quickly, recognizing barriers to commitment. That matrix is innovative thinking and traditional methods. That one is new opportunities, familiar problems. And along comes the individual who wants to make changes, wants to make things better, wants to get away from the sort of current reality of traditional methods, familiar problems, wants things to be brighter, better, different. And then they go through my ABC workshop or help by one of you with your kinesiology, and they stretch their goals. Oh, sorry, comfort zone, and then they stretch their goals. And what's the challenge we have in terms of getting commitment for ourselves and others is to get them from that bottom left-hand quadrant of the comfort zone up into the right-hand quadrant of these innovative ideas, these stretched ideas. And the barrier we need to overcome is those beliefs, expectations, habits, and attitudes. I'm suggesting to you that achieving your stretched aspirations is easy as ABC, because there's our aspiring, there's our being, there's our conditioning, there's the driver of our behavior, our self-concept, the self-talk, the self-image, and the self-efficacy. And that's not a misprint, putting it over there. It's deliberately over there because, as I say, every client I've worked with so far, their aspirations at the subconscious level are greater than their conscious. So we can put them in touch with their subconscious aspirations. We can help them understand how to change the self-concept and to get rid of the conditioning, the handbrake, and new self-image, new driver, new performance is the result. Mindset priming makes achieving your goals by changing your self-concept a comfortable and sustainable triumph is the message. And I think comfortable and sustainable is important because people so often resist change because in the past it's been a struggle. like New Year's resolutions. They struggled and struggled being not like them. And then it didn't last, it didn't work. So the struggle was a waste of time. Why go through that discomfort again? And they creatively avoid, perhaps, seeking to make changes that would be beneficial. So the fourth insight, effective thinking and leadership. Really, mostly here, I'm going to give examples of what people have done. I love this cartoon. I was given it when I was working in Norway. And the idea then was that the boss of the organization saying, this is the way we're going to go. And the team down below saying, we're not bought into that at all. No, thank you. And they're pedaling as far as they can go in the opposite direction. So the guy on the top has not generated commitment. But then, and I always learn from students, one of the students said to me, but yes, okay, that's an interesting definition or explanation of the diagram, but isn't it also possible that the guy on the top is me making a conscious decision? And down below is my subconscious saying, no, I don't like that. I want to get back in my comfort zone, please. And it's a perfectly valid interpretation. So back to this diagram of what to change and how this generates commitment. Establish the ideal goal, set the mental sat-nav, release the mental handbrake, to the point that you get 100% enthusiasm for the goal, comfortable and sustainable process, no resistance to change, and literally no resistance to change in that the muscle testing indicates that they've got rid of all the sabotage in the back of their mind. And Goldie Sayers, the record-holding javelin thrower, that was a bit she particularly liked. She loved the way the kinesiology helped to get rid of the sabotage in her mind. This is philosophically sound as well as psychologically sound. Who am I? What can I contribute? Where am I going? I like to add who's in control. Who am I is about self-image and what level of performance. What can I contribute is about the extent I use my self-efficacy, the use of my potential. Where am I going is about how clear is my vision, how challenging are my goals. And who's in control is about taking accountability and Gestalt. And Gestalt is simply getting things looking the way I want them to be. Simple explanation of Gestalt. With me, it's crooked pictures. I can't stand crooked pictures. If I see a crooked picture, I have to straighten it up. That's getting things how I want them to be. That's the drive and energy to straighten up the mess, if you like. New self-image, new self-efficacy. We have an upward spiral, which is a spiral towards greater happiness, greater success, whatever that may be for us. So let's look quickly at some outcomes of people applying these concepts and then have time for some questions. Reese Prescott was a 19-year-old sprinter, not unheard of, 200-meter sprinter, good sprinter, being coached, but not expected to do great things. This is what he said. I've now set myself more ambitious targets. I'm very keen to have a later session to see if I can stretch my goals further. The sessions have unblocked my inner self-belief, removed negative energy, and given me a clear mindset. The next year, he got a bronze for the 200 meters in the British Championships. The year after, he got gold for the 100 meters in the British Championships. He also came 7th in the World Championships that year. And the year after, he came 2nd in the European Championships. And I was just so chuffed to sort of watch him progress. And he's a slow starter, funny enough. Interestingly, he went to 100 meters and 200 meters because he's notoriously slow off his blocks. But he still managed these remarkable achievements. New Holland's transformation, you remember the tractor people who'd never met budget for 25 years? These concepts were introduced into the company. Productivity was up by 50% in 12 months. They had done really badly for 5 years, let's be fair. Inventory was down by 25%. They launched 2 new tractors. Hello, hello. They met budget for the first time in 25 years. And also, they got a Queen's Award for Export at Martin Astor the Palace. Not bad for a 1-year turnaround from the negativity that they started with. GKN, energy reduction target of 10%. In 2003, they took 1.73 kilowatts to make a kilogram. A year later, they'd saved 26%. reduction. But I want to finish on something that's really important, I think. Lovely man, John McFarlane, who's now chairman of Barclays. When I came across him, he was a rising star in Citibank. And he got very keen and put lots of his people through it, and he went on and has had a remarkable career. You could look him up, but he's currently chairman of Barclays, previously chairman of Aviva. And he had this wonderful technique that I call aiming for St. Paul's. When he was at Citibank, he explained to us that he would call each of his people in turn, privately to his office, and ask them to tell him the maximum they could possibly see themselves achieving in a year. And I've no idea what the numbers would have been back then or would have been now, but let's say a figure of 10 million, just to take a figure. And John would say to them, okay, looking through my window, there's St. Paul's. So St. Paul's Cathedral way over there on the horizon, that's 10 million pounds. Between where we are now and St. Paul's is a window. And metaphorically speaking, you can move that window any way you like. If it's halfway to St. Paul's, that's 5 million. If it's 3/4 the way to St. Paul's, it's 7.5 million. But wherever you put that window is what you're guaranteeing to deliver me this year. The point he was saying to them was, I need to budget. I need to know what I can be sure of getting from my team. But I don't want you aiming for the window. I know if you keep aiming at St. Paul's, your RAS is going to be scanning and scanning and scanning. And this goes back to what I said earlier with the rubber band. They aim for the window. The window is the maximum stretch. Let's say it's 5 million. Halfway through the year, they're already more than halfway through it. So at that point, they go, okay, well, maybe we can stretch to 7.5. And we keep going, and we've maybe got beyond 5 before the year. And okay, maybe we stretch to 10. So you keep the energy going by stretching and stretching. You don't wait to achieve the goal before you stretch. But that's technique called goal setting through. What he said is so important that if your original window, your original target was 5, then whenever you go through that 5 and achieve that 5, you celebrate. So that's so important. So, on your reflections, those of you who filled those questions in before we started, after this talk, perhaps you might want to look at which of your goals and aspirations you could now confidently stretch, to what extent you recognize the barriers are in your own mind, checking on the beliefs, expectations, habits, and attitudes. Consistently, people find that one of those 4 things is, or more than one is what's been holding them back until now. What will you prime your RAS to alert you to from now on? And where would you benefit from improving your self-talk? Those are questions you might want to reflect on after this talk. So thank you for your participation. I'm happy to support you. And we've got time for some questions. If there are any questions in the chat room, I'd be happy to do my best to answer them.
Thank you, Jeremy. I think what we'll do is I'm going to change the setting on the chat room so everybody can see everything now.
Oh, okay.
And then if people want to ask questions in the chat room, then we'll let you answer them, please, Jeremy.
Very good. So from what I'm looking at, it looks as if Jane Collinson got the 6 right, but equally Sarah Thompson got the 9, so maybe she deserves one too. And Sarah Thompson also got the 8. Maybe well done, both of you.
Okay, well, we can print off the chat room afterwards.
Yeah, true.
Okay, so are there any questions for Jeremy? Okay, are you reading these as well?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Somebody was just saying, could you just a quick recap on the RAS?
On the RAS. I hadn't got to that one, thank you. The RAS reticulating activating system, this filter, it's working 24/7, whether we're asleep or not. And its job is to filter out information that is not valuable. Sometimes it's compared to a job that in the old days a good executive secretary used to do for the boss. screen out the junk mail so that only the important stuff got through to the desk. If you're daydreaming as you're walking across the road and a car comes screeching around the corner, you want to hear that car, and that'll get through your filter. If you want to experiment with your RAS, I don't know if you're able to get out and drive much these days. We're all a bit limited. But one fun way of just demonstrating it to yourself, I say this to people when they come on live workshops. On your way home tonight or on your way to the shops today, whenever you might do it, count how many red cars you see with the number 4 and the number plate. Completely useless information. Don't consciously look for them. Just set your mind to, I want to see how many red cars I see or drive past with a 4 and a number plate. Or conjure up any combination you like. And as you're driving, you'll go, oh goodness me, there's one. There's one. You won't have consciously been looking for them, but because you've decided that's valuable, you want to see them, you'll be alerted to them. So I suggest you kind of build up confidence in terms of what your RAS can do for you, what it will alert you to. Or if you wanted to go for a walk in the country, you could decide you want to prime your RAS to show you a particular flower that would be in bloom at this time of year. And as you go walking, you would see it. Perhaps a better example yet, this eye doesn't really work. My left eye doesn't really work. Years and years ago, my niece, one of my nieces, saw me giving a a camera, that's what it was, a camera to her elder brother when he was old enough to have a camera. Oh, Uncle Jeremy, will you give me my first camera when I'm old enough? Delighted to. And she got to be old enough, and she told me the sort of camera she wanted, and it was a horrid, revolting sort of pink thing, but that didn't matter, it was what she wanted. So I went shopping to buy it for her in London. At a camera shop about half a mile down the road from me. And I set out to walk to the camera shop. And I was walking on the shops were on my left as I walked along the pavement, so on my blind side, if you like, given that this eye doesn't really work. And I was going to the camera shop to buy her that camera. I only went about 60 yards. Because after about 60 yards, I walked past a chemist shop. And there in the chemist shop window was the camera that she wanted. My brain knew I was going walking to a shop to buy that camera. Even on my blind side, when I was looking dead ahead of me, I wasn't looking at the window, I was looking dead ahead. The fact that camera was in the window got through my filter. So I hope that helps perhaps give you a little more explanation of what the RAS is about, and then linking it again to, if you set an aspirational goal, the filter will be open to information on how to achieve that. I hope that.
Jeremy, I would actually say read Jeremy's book as well, because he describes it very well in there, Maria. So I recommend that to you. So,
the book's called Achieving Happiness. And the subtitle on it is also How to Boost the Confidence, Self-Esteem, Success and Happiness of Those That Matter to You. It's easy as ABC.
Okay. Now, Jane is asking, Jeremy, could you say a little bit more about some of the kinesiology techniques you will use to help clients get from where they are to where they want to get to?
Golly. Well, that's, as you would all understand, that's entirely up to, it's a combination of things. It's a combination of what is in my repertoire, and it's a combination of what is going to be helpful for the client, if that makes sense to you. I find I do quite a lot of work with chakras, quite often. I do a lot of work and age recessing back to when people were younger. If we're talking about perhaps attitudes or beliefs getting into people's minds, we very often age recess back to when they were younger. 3-in-1 Concepts has a thing called the behavioral barometer. Some of you may have seen a lot of kind of emotional words on there, and testing with that will put them in touch with perhaps the feelings they had when they were younger, maybe feelings of limited choice, limited opportunities, whatever that might be for them, and putting them in touch with what was going on in the past, balancing them around that particular thought, approach, feeling, freeing them up. We only go back in time if it's relevant to today. So I find it difficult to say the techniques I use. I'm trained in Touch for Health, as you know, 3-in-1 Concepts, as you know, Educate, Charles Benham's work, and the clients will call on whichever the resources I have that is appropriate for them at that time. That's probably not a very satisfactory answer, but for now, given the limited time we've got, I'm sorry, I think that's probably the best I can do for now, but please come back to me another time if you'd like to know more. Happy to talk with you about it, anybody.
Okay. Gail is asking, where can she find out more about the Educate techniques?
I don't know who's in charge of Educate. Educate is certainly part of the kinesiology, one of the Ks within the Kinesiology Federation. So if you went on the KF's website, I would have thought that would probably give you access to Educate. It was originally created by Paul Dennison in the States, and I'm ashamed to say I don't actually know who's in charge of Educate in the UK now, but I would have thought that was accessible through the KF's website.
Okay, thank you.
They were certainly part of the inaugural set. Kay McCarroll, who was in charge at the time, certainly was a key member of the team that put the KF together back in those days, 30 years ago.
Fantastic. Okay, everybody just saying really thoroughly enjoyed it, Jeremy, which Julie and I certainly did. I've got the last third of your book to read, so I've got that to look forward to. And also, we've got a private one-to-one session for you to help me with my golf, haven't we?
We have.
When lockdown is allowed for us to meet up.
Just to set you a challenge, that the first golfer I helped was a young man who was very good and he wanted to turn pro, and his handicap was 1.8 when he came to me. 2 weeks later, it was 0.6.
Goodness me. Well, I don't think I'm going to turn pro. I don't think that I'm going to be setting your target for. Jeremy, thank you. Really, really enjoyable. Thank you on behalf of everybody.